I think addiction really started hitting people. I think the times changed a little bit. We're talking about like the world became a little more aggressive in our generation with whatever the flavor of the month in the Middle East, and America's involvement was at that time. We started seeing more aggression and people getting out of high school and realizing that like this maybe it's not a party anymore. Maybe it's a problem. For me, it went from a party to a problem like just overnight. And I'm like, oh wow, it was all fun. Now it's not. What happened? Like I said, it was all good until it was all bad. I was driving home and I got into a wreck where it killed a young man, and it was life changing. And I think I was probably in shock from that incident for probably months, and just central nervous system fully engaged, just trying to make it through life. And luckily, John and Dave Durst, the twins, obviously were really good friends of mine. They were really supportive. My Ted and Joe and Jim were really, really supportive. But you can't escape it. There was a lot of false information. The young man that died, was his family was from Mexico, and there was a lot of false reports on some of the Mexican radio stations that it was a drunk driver hit and run. And yeah, and look, no,
Just make it
no, no,
worse.
yeah, no hard feelings, but like, kids can be brutal
Oh
about
my
this kind of
God.
stuff. And there were some people at Highland that just like, whispers behind your back when you show back up after all that happened. And it's just like, man, what do? You feel a little ostracized, but it's 2 months before you're supposed to graduate, and so you just got to show up and try and make it through, right? And so that's what I kind of did. I just was like, okay, just fuck, just get me through these next 2 months, just get me through this shit so I can just fucking get the fuck away. And that's kind of what I did, right? I was already definitely in my addiction, and somehow I wasn't, under the influence when the accident happened, thank God. But at that point, I just became so resentful at life, and I was just like, yeah, okay, if this is what life has to offer me at 17, well, I've got a response to that.
That got ugly.
Yeah, most definitely. Well, it was, maladaptive coping mechanisms that I developed over time, because I grew up in a very dysfunctional family, right? And, I'm not one of those people that say, oh, my parents, they were this or they were that, but they did the best they could. Yeah, maybe, sometimes they did the best they could. Sometimes they did not do their best, and sometimes they did not even try. And it doesn't mean I have anything against them or I hated them, or I hate them now. That's not it. But I'm not going to sit here and just say, oh yeah, my family did the best they could. Like, sometimes they did the most convenient thing. Sometimes they did the easiest thing. Sometimes they did what they thought was the best. Sometimes they did the best. But for the most part, it was, parents that were addicts. And when you're addicts, you tend to not, always do the best, and you make decisions that are usually in your best interest and not those around you, because your addiction is what drives you. And so, I was again running the streets from a young age, thinking I was more mature than I was. Therefore, I thought I could handle this when I probably, needed a little more support than even I knew.
Oh my gosh, I'm sure you didn't even take a breath until after graduation.
I didn't even take a breath. I immediately started working, and I just plowed through it. So there wasn't, I don't know if it was the norm back then, but there wasn't like, hey, do you feel like you need to talk to somebody? You're going to probably be dealing with some grief, or, some anger or something. Like, it
Why
wasn't
that?
like that. It was just like, it's what we do. We toughen up. We rub some dirt on it, because that's the mentality of the time and the culture, especially when you have parents that are highly addicted. And, we don't acknowledge feelings in this house. There's two feelings: there's quiet, and there's party on 11, and that's it.
Wow, that's you sounded just like him when you said that. There's two levels, on and
Yeah,
off.
that house was either sober and dead quiet, and which was
And
really weird.
normal.
Even as a kid, I'd be like, we're in the same room and he's not talking to me, but he's sitting in his chair, like staring at Wheel of Fortune or something. And I'm like, this is so fucking bizarre. Like, what the fuck? Because Friday would come and fucking insert, whatever drink, and he would become the life of the party and laugh and make fun. And I would see him interacting all happily with all these other people. And in my head, I'm just like, what the fuck? Who is this guy? Who the fuck is this guy? And then back at home, it's just like, we don't talk about shit. So what you do is you process in your mind, and you formulate your own conclusions from that stuff. And as much as you want to say this isn't right, it embeds itself in you on some level, right? And so you just start trying to figure out things with the information that you have, as incomplete as it is or as inaccurate as it is. You still try and use that to formulate some kind of calculation or, you know, way of coping or whatever to the best of your ability.
Now it comes time for you to exhibit some adult skills after this accident, and these are the only examples that you have.
That you think you're more mature than you are. And I had moved out before I graduated. James and myself had moved into his family's house up near the Chelwood and Lomas area. And we had, uh, my mom was married a ton of times. She was married like 9 times that I know of. And one of her husbands had this construction business. And I had just happened to remain friends with him after they were divorced. And he just said, yeah, if you guys want to come work for us, we'll pay you really good. We'll pay you cash. And at that time, we are just like, yeah, let's go do it. So that was the plan after I had that accident. Before the accident, I had different plans, but we were just like, okay, let's go work and make money. So there was no break. Like we were just waiting to be done with high school and then go start working this really good paying construction job. And that probably didn't help the addiction at all. Isolated in these small towns.
I was going to say, were you guys working hard to save for your future, or you're working hard to make money to buy drugs?
If you consider future like what we do after work, yes. But if you consider the future anything beyond what was right in front of our eyes, we were just there's times where we were working in Gallup where I mean, we would just be drinking and obviously smoking weed every day, but just doing tons of cocaine. And, I'd be like, I'm going to go get an 8 ball in Albuquerque. I'll drive and I'll get it and come back. And,
Oh,
we would plow through that and then go to work. And then I'd get off work and I'd be like, let's get some more. I'd drive back to Albuquerque. Yeah, there were times where I'd do that 4 or 5 nights in a row, insanity, what we put our body through. Nowadays, I'd fucking need an IV drip after that.
you wouldn't make it back and forth that many times in one week. Some
No,
sort of accident.
I'd have to pull over to a rest stop between here and Gallup just to take a
Take some
nap.
cocaine. It was the 80s. That was the thing, right? So before you're
Yeah.
even out of high school, everybody's already doing
A
coke.
lot of coke. I was doing a lot of speed. I don't think a lot of people knew that. I was drinking and smoking a lot of weed, but I was doing a lot of speed because you used to be able to get the Whiteys, the White Cross at all the gas stations.
Oh my
The
goodness.
the
Oh,
trucker speed,
Jeff. Wow.
which was real ephedrine back in
Oh
the
my,
day.
yuck.
And so I was
Ugh.
popping a bunch of pills, smoking a lot of weed. The first time I did coke was with my brother at 12. And so when I could get that, we would get that. But like everything else was almost over the counter. And so we would buy just a ton of speed and pills and crush them and just snort the shit out of everything we could.
This is middle school, high school.
Um,
This is
yeah,
before
definitely in middle school. We started, um,
regularly.
yeah, in high school it was like constant. In high school it was constant, and like crack was like by the time I was 18, I was a full-blown crackhead.
Because that's 87, 88,
Yep,
right?
yep, yep, yep.
Uh,
And 88, almost all my peer group is out of high school. We're all doing what we're doing, and the peer group expanded a little bit. When you start realizing, oh, there's other people like me, and they're kind of living like I am now. So you find those people and you bond with them. One of them that we were friends in high school, but we really became good friends right after was like a really like a brother to me for many many years. And so him and I were just was like, oh yeah, you like pedal to the metal, so do I. Let's fucking go. Let
the two of you together was a bad combo.
you and 99% of the people that knew us would probably agree with that wholeheartedly. Like we were pretty inseparable, and when things got really dark, it's just people were pretty much like, yeah, you probably should stay away from those guys.
You guys moved in together, didn't you?
Yeah, we lived in several places. Like when I lived, his family owned a bunch of houses on Cole in between Yale and Buena Vista. And so we lived over there, sometimes not in the same house, sometimes just in houses, 1 or 2 houses away from each other. He eventually got into the junk business down on Broadway. I lived with him down there. He stayed with me at different places, but yeah, we were together most of the time
Until it got bad.
until it got really bad. I mean, we got into like some pretty heavy criminal activity and involved with some. He got involved with some Colombians when he got a kilo of cocaine fronted to him from these Colombians. And at this time, I was working with some cartel guys from Mexico, and I was selling just a copious amount of cannabis and cocaine and starting to dabble in heroin. And it was really dark. It was just really dark. And so a lot, we felt that like, I don't think it was a conscious thought, but I think we realized that we were a level or two above certain people in the things that we were doing. Like there was the casual user, there was the addict, and then there was us who was the hardcore addict and also involved with some like really unsavory people. And, not a lot of people knew that world. A lot of people knew that we had the drugs and, knew that there was always a party for a while. But then after a while, the party was just us, him and I, and doing what we did and escalating into like some pretty serious criminal behavior. And jail started becoming more of a thing. For me, prison became more of a thing. And so just one of those things where if you look at it from a 10,000-foot view, it was the total natural progression that you would, expect. If you look at it way back in, you'd be like, oh yeah, if you keep doing that, you're going to go there, then you're going to go there, then you're going to go there. So we were probably the stereotypical prototype of what you would expect if you trace it back far enough and be like, yeah, those guys are going to end up in a place that's not good and very dark.
Well, you're both on a mission too. You weren't just accidentally slipping into addiction.
When nobody else would want to like get involved with what Dan was thinking, he could always call me and I'd be like, fuck it, let's do it. When no one else would want to get involved with that, with what I was thinking, I could always call him and be like, oh, let's go, And so it's we fed off each other and in very healthy ways sometimes, in our vulnerable moments, but also in some very dark times. Right. We started scaring off people that I think we might have been scared of in the years previous just from our behavior.
Wow. You guys are getting drugs from the cartels and the Colombians. You're trying to fuel your own addictions.
Yeah, we were trying to be ballers and supply our habit, make some money. And, you think when you meet these people that offer you these tremendous amounts of drugs at really good prices
Oh,
versus,
yeah, it's a
and you
great
start thinking
idea.
like, yeah, you start thinking like, oh, I've been selling a little, well, a lot for us, but if I had it at this price, I could sell a lot more and I could make a lot more. And for a hot minute, I think we did. I mean, I was getting 400 or 500 pounds of weed a week from the cartel when I was telling you like that Mexican dirt weed was going for like 800 or $1,000, and they're like, "We'll give you all you want for $250. You just got to do this, and let us keep it at your house." And then you meet the cocaine connect from down south, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll give you, a kilo of cocaine for $11,000, and just you got to do this, and let us keep it at your house." And then, then you meet the heroin guy, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll front you some of this too." Da da da. And it's just when you're in that world, as long as you're making payments on time, everything's great
Until you're not.
until you're not, and then you're
Some,
kidnapped.
oh, where'd the heroin come from, Jeff?
Ironically enough, at this time, and I were hanging out and partying a lot, smoking a lot of crack, and had just gone up to visit a person. And from what I understand, he got turned on up there, and he came back, and he was living off the one way by. And little did he know that had already been experimenting a little, and little did know that I had been experimenting a little. And we all kind of, I think all of us might have had the same idea, like, wow, this is really dark. I don't even know if I want my best friends to know about this. And
Yeah.
so if my memory serves me right, I went to see one day at his apartment and divulged it to, hey, I'm doing this. And I think it was like, well, I have too. And they started. And then like a couple of days later, I was with at the house on the one way, and he's like, hey, dude, I want to let you know I've been doing this. You want to try it? And I was just like, well, hey, dude, I want to let you know that I've already been doing it. Sure. And so that was kerosene on the fire. And I think I think for us, really, where it stemmed from is we've been smoking so much crack and doing stimulants for so long. Our nervous system and our neuroreceptors were shot. We would just smoke crack or do whatever and immediately become paranoid and just be up and hate that feeling. And I think we used it as a way to come down off a lot of that stuff. At least I did. Once I found out that I could smoke a shit ton of crack and then do a load of heroin and it would help bring me down, I was like, oh shit, now we can really get going. You know what I
Oh
mean?
my
Now we can just,
gosh.
we have a way to come down now, and we don't have to be paranoid for 8 hours after taking a hit or whatever. So
Wow.
for
So
me,
you
that's
guys,
how it was. I know
yeah.
I utilized it that way, but I don't know if that was his initial intention or if it was just like, hey, I'm going to try heroin, but I have a sneaky suspicion knowing him the way I did.
Well, and I would guess it may be a natural progression. A lot of people that do stimulants then start looking for ways to sleep at night and vice versa. It's not
Yeah.
uncommon for people to try to sedate themselves.
Right, right. Yeah, sleep was becoming an increasingly hard to come by commodity for us as we started progressing through our addiction. there was an element that came into town through another friend of ours from, and it got pretty dark when this person showed up, and it fast forwarded the criminal stuff, right? And all of us started. I think it was just that's part of the natural progression too. Eventually, when you can't, when you get behind and you got to make some quick money and someone says, "Hey, well, I've got this or I've got that. Let's go steal a truck." And at first you're like, "Oh, I don't want to steal a truck." And then they show you how easy it is, or, how much money you can make off it. You're like, "Oh, well, maybe I'll do it one time." And, the first time I went on a commercial burglary, I was like, "Ah, fuck, I don't really want to do this, but it's just a business and they're going to claim it on insurance and they're probably going to lie and make a bunch of money." We justify and rationalize the most insane shit. And so, my thing was like, I'm not going to break into houses. I won't ever get that personal. I'm not going to hurt families or individuals. I'm just going to steal from businesses because they probably steal from other people. So just like we get twisted inside our own fucking thinking. And the mental gymnastics you go through to rationalize and justify the things that you do can be pretty insane, even though we lie to ourselves in our own voice. So a lot of times we mistake it for the truth. And if you tell yourself those things long enough, they become your truth. And that's what it was, right? It was like just constant lying to yourself, even though you are, but you're not really lying to convince other people. You're lying to convince yourself so that you can continue doing what you're doing and not have to deal with those internal consequences that might come up because, once you get that deep into the life, it's just like, well, the last thing I need is anything that's going to trip me up as far as doing what I need to do. So I don't need to deal with guilt. I don't need to deal with shame. I don't want to deal with sadness. I don't want to deal with anything that's going to get in the way of me getting what I want, which is, the drugs and the money. And so you learn how to stuff that shit. And a lot of times it comes at, the conversation you have with yourself and the justification and the rationalization that we just talked about. And then that becomes not the lie, but your story from an internal to external.